Maria had always been the kind of worker who stayed in the background. She arrived on time, did her job quietly, and never made much fuss. At the office, most people barely noticed her beyond the polite greetings in the hallway. She worked in the customer service department of a large company, one of those jobs where the hours felt long and the work often went unnoticed by management. But Maria never complained. She needed the job, and she needed the extra shifts. What her colleagues didn't know was that every extra hour she worked was not for luxury or comfort, but simply to keep her family afloat. The company had a huge building with bright lights, shining glass doors, and polished floors. Executives in suits walked with confidence, holding expensive phones and rushing into meetings. Maria, on the other hand, blended into the background with her plain clothes, worn shoes, and tired but gentle smile. Every day she came in early and left late, volunteering for double shifts whenever someone else called in sick. Some people whispered that she was desperate for money. Others admired her work ethic but never asked why she pushed herself so much. One evening, after an unusually long day, Maria felt her stomach growl. She had skipped both breakfast and lunch because she had no time to prepare food at home. By the time evening came, she was lightheaded and weak. Normally she would have kept quiet, drinking water to hide her hunger, but that day the fatigue became too much. She gathered the courage to approach the break room where some leftover food from a meeting had been placed. Sandwiches, fruit, and a few unopened bottles of juice sat on the table. Maria looked around carefully, then softly asked her supervisor if she could take some food home. Her request seemed small, but in a company where employees usually ordered their own meals or went out to eat, it stood out. The supervisor blinked, a little surprised, but nodded kindly. What neither Maria nor the supervisor realized was that the CEO of the company, Mr. Reynolds, happened to be in the building that evening. He had been walking through the office floors to get a sense of how employees worked late hours. Mr. Reynolds was not the type of CEO who always stayed in the top floor corner office. Sometimes he liked to walk around quietly, watching without announcing himself. As he passed by, he overheard Maria's soft voice. He stopped, curious. An employee asking for food was unusual in his company. He expected employees to be comfortable enough to afford their meals. Something about her tone caught his attention. It was not greedy or demanding, but almost shy, as if she felt guilty for asking. He watched from a distance as Maria carefully packed a small portion of the leftover food into a container, thanked her supervisor politely, and walked back to her desk. Mr. Reynolds felt something stir inside him. Over the years, he had built the company from a small office into a national brand. He prided himself on paying fair wages and offering benefits, yet here was one of his employees clearly hardworking who looked too tired, too hungry, and too modest to even ask for help directly. He wondered who she was and what her story might be. CEOs often looked at numbers, reports, and charts, but seeing Maria reminded him that behind every number was a real human being. Over the next few days, Mr. Reynolds could not get Maria out of his mind. He noticed that she was almost always at her desk when he passed by, whether early in the morning or late at night. She did not complain or show signs of frustration, but her tired eyes told a different story. He asked a manager about her, and the answer was simple: she's one of our hardest workers. Always takes extra shifts. Doesn't talk much. That made Mr. Reynolds even more curious. Why would someone work so much yet still need to ask for food? Wasn't her paycheck enough? He began to pay closer attention without letting her know. One evening, he saw her quietly gathering her things after another double shift. She did not join co-workers going out for dinner. Instead, she walked quickly out of the building, holding her worn bag tightly against her shoulder. Her steps seemed heavy, but there was also urgency in them, as though she needed to reach somewhere important. Mr. Reynolds sat in his car in the parking lot, debating with himself. He was not a man who normally followed employees. It seemed strange, even intrusive. but his instincts told him that something about Maria's life outside of work might explain why she seemed to carry such a heavy burden. Leadership, he reminded himself, was not just about making decisions in the boardroom. It was also about understanding the people who kept the company running day after day. So, that night, curiosity and concern pushed him to make a decision. He turned on his car engine and began to follow Maria at a respectful distance. As he drove behind her, he noticed how far she had to walk before reaching the nearest bus stop. She didn't own a car, which meant she relied on public transport even after exhausting 12-hour shifts. She boarded a crowded bus, found a small corner to stand in, and leaned against the pole as the bus rattled through the city. Mr. Reynolds followed in his car, feeling both uncomfortable and determined. It wasn't about spying, it was about understanding why someone in his company, someone working so hard, still lived like this. When Maria finally stepped off the bus nearly 40 minutes later, the surroundings had changed. The tall glass towers and busy streets had faded into small shops, older houses, and cracked sidewalks. The street lights here were dim, and the air felt different, quieter, heavier. Mr. Reynolds parked his car discreetly, not wanting her to notice. He watched as Maria walked with steady steps, carrying her bag and the small container of food she had taken earlier. She turned into a narrow alley, then entered a worn-out apartment building. The building was nothing like the sleek office where she spent her days. Paint peeled from the walls, windows were broken in places, and the stairwell lights flickered weakly. Yet Maria walked in without hesitation, as if this was her normal life. Mr. Reynolds sat in his car, staring at the building, feeling a mixture of surprise and sadness. He had always known there were employees who came from difficult backgrounds, but he had never personally seen the stark contrast between his world and theirs. Inside that apartment, lights flickered on, and faint sounds of voices carried through the thin walls. Mr. Reynolds stayed in his car longer than he expected, thinking about what he had just witnessed. Maria's life was clearly much harder than he had imagined. Her quiet request for food was no longer just a simple act, it was a window into a struggle she had been carrying silently, without asking anyone for help. That night, as he finally drove home to his large, comfortable house, Mr. Reynolds found himself replaying the scene over and over in his mind. For the first time in a long while, the success of his company felt incomplete. Numbers and profits suddenly seemed less important compared to the real story of the woman who worked tirelessly in his office and still had to stretch herself thin just to survive. He knew this was only the beginning of what he would discover about Maria, and deep down, he felt that his own perspective on leadership and responsibility was about to change forever. The following morning, the office buzzed as usual with the sound of ringing phones, typing keyboards, and low conversations. For most employees, it was just another regular day. But for Mr. Reynolds, the CEO, the images of Maria walking through that dark street and into the old apartment building lingered in his mind. He had barely slept the night before, replaying what he had seen over and over. He wondered how someone so hard-working, so dedicated, could be living under such difficult circumstances. He wanted answers, but more than that, he wanted to understand. From his corner office on the top floor, he could see Maria down on the customer service floor, already at her desk before many of her colleagues arrived. She wore the same simple clothes, her hair tied back neatly, her face calm even though there were faint shadows beneath her eyes. To anyone else, she looked like just another employee starting her shift. But to Mr. Reynolds, after what he had witnessed, she looked like someone carrying an invisible weight that no one else noticed. Throughout the day, he found himself distracted. In meetings, while others discussed profits, marketing strategies, and quarterly growth, his thoughts drifted back to Maria. He remembered the way she had politely asked for leftover food, the way she had walked quickly through the dim streets, the way she had quietly blended into the background at work. He realized he knew almost nothing about her beyond her job title, yet her silent story had touched him more deeply than any business success in recent months. That evening, just like before, Maria stayed late. Her desk light remained on when most employees had already packed up and left. She answered customer calls with patience, handled complaints calmly, and even helped a colleague struggling with a tricky case. When she finally gathered her bag to leave, Mr. Reynolds once again found himself unable to resist. He wanted to know more. The night before, he had only seen the outside of her apartment building. Tonight, he wanted to understand what was happening inside. He followed her once again, keeping a careful distance so as not to make her uncomfortable. Just like before, she walked the long distance to the bus stop, boarded the crowded bus, and stood silently with her head slightly bowed, as though lost in her own thoughts. The ride was long and noisy, yet Maria remained quiet, holding onto her bag protectively. Mr. Reynolds, driving behind the bus, felt his heart grow heavier with every passing stop. He realized how different her life was from his own. When she finally stepped off the bus and walked into her neighborhood, Mr. Reynolds parked his car in the same discreet spot. Maria entered the old building again. This time, however, he felt compelled to step out of his car. He told himself he would not intrude, but he wanted to see with his own eyes why she worked so much and why she lived this way. He walked toward the building carefully, his footsteps slow on the cracked pavement. The closer he got, the more details he noticed: broken mailboxes, paint peeling off the walls, the faint smell of dampness. A few children ran past him, their laughter mixed with the sound of a baby crying from an open window above. The building looked weary, as though it had carried too many struggles on its shoulders. From the stairwell, he heard Maria's footsteps above him. She had reached her apartment. He stopped at a corner where he could see without being seen. Through the half-opened window, he caught sight of the room inside. What he saw made him pause. Maria was greeted by two young children who ran to her, their faces lighting up with joy at her arrival. They hugged her tightly, chattering about their day. She smiled at them warmly, even though exhaustion was written all over her face. She set her bag down and carefully pulled out the small portion of food she had carried from work. The children's eyes lit up as if she had brought them a feast. She divided the food equally between them, making sure they ate first before she even touched a piece. In the corner of the small room, Mr. Reynolds noticed a woman lying on a bed. Her face was pale, her body thin, and her movements slow. Maria walked over to her, touched her forehead gently, and whispered something reassuring. Then she prepared a small glass of water and helped the woman take her medication. The woman smiled faintly at her daughter, gratitude shining in her tired eyes. Mr. Reynolds realized what was happening. The woman was Maria's mother, clearly unwell and in need of constant care. The two children must have been Maria's younger siblings. It all made sense now: why Maria worked double shifts, why she rarely ate, why she asked for food. She was carrying the entire responsibility of her family on her shoulders. Standing there in the dim hallway, Mr. Reynolds felt a wave of emotions he hadn't experienced in years. Shock, sadness, admiration, and guilt all mixed together. Here was one of his employees, giving everything she had not just to her job, but to her family. And she had done it quietly, without ever asking for special treatment or pity. Inside the apartment, Maria continued her routine. She sat with her siblings, helped them with their schoolwork, and encouraged them with patience. Later, she tucked them into bed, humming softly until their eyes closed. Then she sat by her mother's side, gently massaging her hands, her own eyes heavy with sleep. She finally allowed herself a few bites of bread before cleaning up and preparing for the next day. Mr. Reynolds stood silently for a long time before leaving. He had seen enough to understand that Maria was not just another worker. She was a pillar holding up her entire household, sacrificing her own comfort and rest so that her family could survive. That night, as he drove back to his own large home with bright lights, clean walls, and a fridge full of food, he felt a deep sense of discomfort. He realized he had been so focused on company goals, profits, and expansion that he had overlooked the quiet struggles of the very people who made the company successful. Maria's story was just one, but how many others were silently carrying burdens he had never noticed. Lying in bed, Mr. Reynolds could not sleep. The image of Maria carefully dividing the food among her siblings, her gentle care for her mother, and her own quiet endurance kept replaying in his mind. He understood now why she looked so tired every day at work. He also understood that leadership was not just about managing a company, it was about looking after people. The next morning, he woke with a clear decision forming in his mind. He needed to do something for Maria, not as charity, but as recognition for her strength and dedication. More than that, he needed to look closely at the lives of his employees, to ensure that no one in his company ever had to struggle in silence again. What he had seen could not be ignored. Something inside him had changed, and he knew it was only the beginning. The following days moved slowly for Mr. Reynolds, though for Maria they seemed to pass in the same rhythm she had grown used to. She worked, she stayed late, she carried her quiet dignity, and she returned home to her responsibilities. For her, it was routine. For Mr. Reynolds, however, it was impossible to forget what he had seen. Every time he looked at her from his corner office, he remembered the dim apartment, the children's eager smiles, and the pale figure of her sick mother. Those images followed him into meetings, dinners, and even in the silence of his home office at night. For years, Mr. Reynolds had been praised for being a strong leader, a visionary businessman who took his company from modest beginnings to a national powerhouse. Yet now, sitting in those boardrooms, he felt strangely out of place. Charts and numbers filled the screens during presentations, but behind every number he began to imagine faces like Maria's. What good was growth if some of his own workers were struggling in silence? One evening, when most of the staff had gone home, he noticed Maria again at her desk, typing away, her shoulders hunched slightly from fatigue. He found himself walking down to her floor, something he rarely did without a reason. As he passed by, he greeted her casually. She looked up, startled, then gave a polite smile. "Good evening, sir," she said softly, before turning back to her work. There was no sign in her voice that she expected anything from him, no hint of complaint. It struck him again just how quietly she bore her life. That night, when Maria left, he felt a pull inside him. He knew it wasn't enough just to feel sorry or admire her strength. He needed to see more. The night he had seen her from the hallway window had left him unsettled, but it hadn't shown him everything. He wanted to understand the full picture, not to intrude, but to truly know the weight she carried every single day. So once again, he followed. From his car, he watched her make the long journey home. He noted the way she walked quickly, never wasting a step, as if every minute mattered. He noticed how her shoulders seemed to sag more the closer she got to her building, as though the weight of her responsibilities pressed down harder with every block she passed. This time, when she entered her apartment, Mr. Reynolds did not stay far. He climbed the stairwell quietly, careful not to be noticed. He stopped near her door, close enough to hear and glimpse what happened inside. The voices carried clearly through the thin walls. "Maria! You're back," one of the children exclaimed, their tone full of relief and joy. "I told you I'd come, didn't I?" Maria replied warmly, her voice tired but full of love. "Now, what did my brave brother and sister do today?" The children chattered excitedly, telling her about their school day, the drawings they made, and the games they played. She laughed softly, listening to each of them, giving them her full attention even though her own exhaustion was evident. Then Mr. Reynolds heard a weak cough from the back of the room. Maria's voice grew softer. "Mom, here's your medicine. I brought some bread and fruit too. You must eat a little." Her mother's faint reply carried through. "You work too hard, Maria." "You don't have to." "I do," Maria interrupted gently but firmly. I have to. Don't worry about me. Just focus on getting better. There was a silence, followed by the sound of a small laugh from her mother. You've grown so strong, my daughter. Stronger than me. Mr. Reynolds leaned against the cold wall of the stairwell, his throat tight. He had expected difficulty, yes, but what he was witnessing was far more than that. It was sacrifice woven into every moment of Maria's life. She didn't just provide for her family financially, she carried them emotionally, holding the family together like glue even when she was nearly breaking herself. Inside, Maria divided the food carefully. The children ate with joy, talking between bites, while Maria set aside her own portion, waiting until they were satisfied before touching hers. Later, she helped them with their homework, patiently explaining answers even though her eyes looked heavy. When they grew restless, she told them a story, her voice soft and comforting. She laughed when they laughed, even though Mr. Reynolds could hear the fatigue underneath. Hours passed before she finally prepared the small living space for sleep. She laid her siblings down, tucked them in, and hummed softly until they drifted off. Then she returned to her mother's side, adjusting the blanket and holding her hand. For a long time, she simply sat there in silence, her head bowed, her hand resting over her mother's. Mr. Reynolds felt an ache in his chest. Here was a woman who worked double shifts, returned home exhausted, and still gave everything she had left to others. Her own needs came last, always last. No wonder she looked so tired at work, she never stopped giving. Finally, Maria stood, quietly prepared her bag for the next day, and lay down on a thin mattress near her siblings. She did not even sleep on the bed, choosing instead to be close to the children in case they needed her during the night. The room grew quiet. Mr. Reynolds stayed there longer than he had planned, his thoughts heavy. He had built his success on discipline, ambition, and vision. Yet in that small apartment, he saw a different kind of success, the success of love, sacrifice, and resilience. Maria had no wealth, no comfort, yet she lived with a strength greater than most people he knew. When he finally left and walked back to his car, the city felt different to him. The tall towers no longer seemed as impressive. The wide streets, the glowing advertisements, the busy restaurants, they all felt shallow compared to the quiet dignity he had just witnessed. He realized that leadership, real leadership, meant more than creating profit. It meant seeing people, truly seeing them, and recognizing the battles they fought outside the walls of the office. As he drove home, he thought of his own life. He thought of the warm meals waiting in his kitchen, the large bed in his room, the silence of his empty house. For the first time, he felt the sharp difference between comfort and meaning. Comfort was what he had. Meaning was what Maria carried every day without even realizing it. That night, Mr. Reynolds could not sleep again. He thought of Maria's siblings, their bright smiles despite the hardship. He thought of her mother, weak but grateful. He thought of Maria herself, working endlessly, sacrificing quietly, holding her family together. He knew now that he could not simply be a bystander. He had seen too much, and with that knowledge came responsibility. The next morning, as the sun rose and the office filled with life again, Mr. Reynolds made a silent promise to himself. He would no longer watch from a distance. He would step in. But he needed to do it carefully, with respect, without making Maria feel ashamed or pitied. She deserved dignity, recognition, and support. And he would find a way to give it to her. For now, though, he sat in his office, staring at the floor below where Maria worked tirelessly. To others, she was invisible, just another employee. But to him, after what he had seen, she was extraordinary. And soon, he knew, the world around her would see it too. The following week began like any other for Maria, though in her mind, there was a quiet tension she didn't recognize. She moved through her double shifts with determination, yet her body felt heavier, her back stiffer, and her feet more sore than usual. Despite this, she smiled for her co-workers, answered emails promptly, and continued to complete every task with precision. Her dedication was unwavering, even when the exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. Meanwhile, Mr. Reynolds had made a decision. He could no longer remain a distant observer. He knew that any sudden gesture could embarrass Maria or make her feel uncomfortable. She was proud and independent, and that pride was part of her strength. He needed a careful plan, one that showed support without undermining her dignity. That afternoon, he called his assistant and asked her to arrange a meeting with Maria. It had to appear routine, a regular check-in, nothing more. When the invitation reached Maria, she raised an eyebrow. Her manager seldom called for meetings directly from the CEO. She wondered if she had made a mistake or forgotten a deadline. Nonetheless, she prepared herself, straightened her uniform, and approached the glass office where Mr. Reynolds waited. "Good afternoon, Maria," he said warmly as she entered. His office was bright, spacious, and silent except for the soft hum of computers. "Please, sit. I wanted to talk to you for a few minutes." Maria hesitated but took the seat, adjusting her posture. She had no idea what to expect. "I've been observing your work," Mr. Reynolds began, choosing his words carefully. "Not just your professional performance, but the dedication you show, the way you handle responsibilities, and the care you take with your team and family. I know that sounds unusual coming from a CEO, but I believe in recognizing extraordinary effort, and you are extraordinary." Maria's eyes widened slightly. She had received praise before, but never like this, never so personal and sincere. She felt a strange mixture of pride and discomfort. She wasn't used to being seen beyond the work she completed. "I I'm just doing my job, sir," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "No, Maria," he replied gently. "You're doing much more than a job. You are supporting your family, managing multiple responsibilities, and still performing at the highest level here. That takes strength, courage, and commitment. That is remarkable." Maria's throat tightened, and she struggled to keep her composure. She looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond. The attention, though kind, was overwhelming. "I want to help," Mr. Reynolds continued, leaning forward slightly. "I want to make sure you have the support you need, so that you can continue to excel without carrying this heavy burden alone. We can arrange assistance, flexible schedules, or anything else you may need. You deserve that support, Maria." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Maria's mind raced. She had never considered asking for help. Asking for help meant admitting weakness, and she had spent her life carrying her responsibilities alone. But now, hearing the sincerity in his voice, she realized that accepting help wasn't weakness, it was an opportunity to continue giving, without breaking herself. "Thank you," she said softly. I I don't know what to say. No one has ever noticed like this before." "You don't have to say anything," Mr. Reynolds replied. "Just let us help you. You've given so much already. It's time someone gave back to you." From that day, small changes began to take place. The company arranged a schedule that allowed Maria to have slightly shorter shifts, and someone from HR began checking in to offer support where needed. She was given a small stipend to help with groceries and medicine, and the office created a program for employees to request confidential assistance for personal or family needs. Maria noticed the changes, but she continued her routine. She still worked hard, still came home tired, still cared for her family. But now, there was a subtle relief, a feeling that someone was watching out for her, not to criticize, but to support. She carried on with her life, but her steps felt lighter, and her shoulders less burdened. Meanwhile, Mr. Reynolds made it a point to quietly observe. He never interfered directly in her personal life, never intruded, but he found ways to ensure she had what she needed. He arranged for home delivery of certain supplies, knowing that even small gestures could reduce stress and fatigue. He made sure the team she supervised had the resources to ease her workload. One evening, after her shift ended earlier than usual, Maria returned home to find her mother resting comfortably, the children finishing their homework at the kitchen table. For the first time in weeks, there was enough food for everyone, and no one went to bed hungry. Maria paused in the doorway, letting herself take in the moment. She felt a warmth that went beyond satisfaction. It was relief, gratitude, and hope mingled together. She began to notice that small things started to change in her family life. Her mother was able to take better care of herself, resting without worrying about Maria's return. The children were happier, less anxious about meals or missing necessities. The household atmosphere grew lighter, more optimistic, because one person, though unseen and unspoken, had made it possible for her to continue her struggle without collapsing under the weight of it. At work, Maria's performance continued to shine. Her colleagues noticed her confidence improving subtly, her ability to manage multiple tasks more effectively. Though nothing in her appearance changed dramatically, there was a quiet energy about her that people couldn't ignore. The spark in her eyes, the steadiness in her hands, the calm in her voice, it was all enhanced by the support she had silently received. One day, as she walked into the office, she saw Mr. Reynolds approaching with a small envelope in hand. He handed it to her without a word, then smiled warmly before walking away. Maria opened it carefully and found a note of encouragement and a gift card for her family's needs. She felt a lump in her throat. She realized that someone cared about her well-being, not for the work she did for the company, but for the person she was. Over time, Maria's story began to spread quietly among the office staff. They noticed the subtle changes, the way management seemed more attentive to employees' personal lives, the little improvements in work-life balance. Though no one spoke openly about it, they admired her resilience and the quiet power she displayed every day. Her example inspired a culture of empathy and care within the office. People began to look out for one another, understanding that life outside of work could be difficult, and that support could make all the difference. Despite the recognition she was receiving, Maria remained humble. She did not boast, she did not seek attention, and she never expected anything from anyone. Her strength was quiet, her dedication consistent, and her love for her family unwavering. But now, with support finally arriving, her family life improved gradually, her own health stabilized, and she began to feel that perhaps she could dream beyond the immediate struggles of daily survival. Mr. Reynolds, observing all of this, felt a deep satisfaction unlike any he had known in business deals or boardroom victories. He realized that real success was not just about profits or recognition, it was about impact, about changing lives for the better, and about acknowledging the silent battles that people like Maria faced every day. He had always considered himself a fair and compassionate leader, but now he understood that leadership also meant action, noticing, understanding, and intervening when it truly mattered. Maria's journey had changed, not because she had stopped working or giving, but because someone had seen her humanity. The act of recognition, combined with genuine support, gave her the chance to continue her life with strength, yet without the unbearable weight of total responsibility. Her story was no longer one of quiet suffering, it was a story of resilience, hope, and a network of care that allowed her to shine even brighter. And in that realization, Maria began to see something new within herself, that accepting help was not weakness, but courage, that leaning on others did not diminish her strength, and that her story, once so solitary and burdensome, could now become one of shared effort, compassion, and enduring hope. The following weeks moved quickly, but in a way that felt lighter for Maria. She had come to understand that life didn't have to be an endless struggle carried alone. Small gestures of help, quiet support, and understanding from people who cared had changed the rhythm of her days. Though she still worked double shifts, she no longer felt the constant crushing weight of exhaustion. Her mornings began differently. She woke up knowing that the household had enough food and supplies, that her mother could rest, and that the children could focus on their schoolwork without worry. Even her walks to the bus stop felt lighter, as if each step carried less tension. Maria found herself smiling more often, laughing at the small things her children did, and feeling a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. At work, her confidence continued to grow. She engaged more openly with her colleagues, sharing ideas and suggestions during team meetings. Her insights were respected, and her leadership within the group became more visible. People admired her ability to stay calm under pressure, to organize effectively, and to support others even while managing her own responsibilities. One afternoon, the company announced a new initiative. It was designed to recognize employees who had demonstrated exceptional dedication, resilience, or impact on their teams. Maria had not expected to be noticed in this way. She thought her efforts were ordinary, simply the day-to-day life of someone trying to keep their family and work in balance. But as her name was called during the announcement, she felt a mix of surprise, pride, and humility. Mr. Reynolds stood nearby, smiling warmly. He knew that this recognition was more than just an award. It was a statement that the company valued people, not just productivity. As Maria walked to receive her certificate, she noticed her co-workers applauding, some with genuine admiration, others with subtle nods of respect. It was a moment that felt surreal, yet profoundly affirming. After the ceremony, Maria returned to her desk and found a small card waiting for her. It was from Mr. Reynolds. She opened it carefully and read his words, "Your dedication and resilience inspire more than you realize. Keep being you. We are here to support you every step of the way." She felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent so long pushing forward alone that the idea of someone seeing her struggles and caring about them felt almost foreign. That evening, Maria arrived home to a different scene than she was used to. Her children were playing quietly in the living room, her mother was preparing a simple but nourishing dinner, and the air seemed lighter. Maria felt a warmth in her chest, a sense that life had shifted in subtle but meaningful ways. She realized that the support she had received allowed her to not just survive, but to thrive in ways she hadn't imagined possible. Over the next few months, Maria's life began to change more visibly. She no longer had to skip meals or worry about which bills she could pay. She was able to afford small comforts, like replacing worn-out shoes for her children, buying fresh fruits and vegetables, and occasionally treating her family to a simple outing. The stress that had once defined her days started to fade, replaced with a quiet confidence and hope for the future. At work, her improvements were recognized not just in awards, but in opportunities. She was invited to lead a small team on a special project, one that required creativity, planning, and collaboration. Maria approached it with the same dedication she applied to everything, but now she had a sense of balance and confidence that made her leadership even stronger. Her team respected her guidance, and together they accomplished tasks that exceeded expectations. One afternoon, as Maria walked through the office, she overheard a conversation between two colleagues. They were talking about the new employee support program and how it had helped several people balance work and family responsibilities. Maria realized that her own story had quietly influenced change beyond herself. Her struggles and resilience had inspired the company to consider employees' well-being more seriously, and that ripple effect was something she had never imagined possible. At home, Maria noticed her children growing happier and more confident. Her mother laughed more freely, no longer burdened by the constant worry about daily survival. Even small routines, like preparing breakfast or doing homework together, became moments of connection rather than sources of stress. Maria felt a sense of gratitude that went beyond words. She had worked so hard for her family, and now she saw the fruits of that effort in the joy and stability surrounding her. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Maria sat quietly with her mother. They talked about everything and nothing: work, school, hopes for the future, and the small victories that often went unnoticed. Her mother reached over and held her hand, saying, "Maria, you've done so much for us. Now it's okay to let others help you too. Maria smiled, realizing that accepting support did not diminish her strength, it allowed her to continue giving with renewed energy and heart. Her relationship with Mr. Reynolds evolved quietly as well. They didn't speak frequently outside of work, but the small gestures, the note, the recognition, the support built a bridge of trust and respect. Maria understood that he valued not just her work, but her humanity. And Mr. Reynolds, in turn, saw the impact that a single employee's dedication and resilience could have on an entire organization and beyond. Months later, Maria received another surprise. The company had organized a small celebration for employees who had shown extraordinary resilience. She was invited to speak briefly about her experiences. Standing before her colleagues, Maria felt a mixture of nervousness and pride. She shared her story honestly, speaking about challenges, perseverance, and the importance of support. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. "Life is not easy," she said softly. "Sometimes we carry burdens that feel too heavy. But there is strength in asking for help, in accepting kindness, and in trusting that people who care can make a difference. I have learned that we are stronger together, and that even small acts of support can change someone's life." Her colleagues listened in silence, moved by her honesty. Applause followed, genuine and heartfelt. Maria felt a sense of connection she had rarely experienced before. Her story, her struggles, and her perseverance had touched people, inspiring them to consider their own actions and how they might support others. At home, Maria reflected on the journey she had been through. She remembered the nights of exhaustion, the worry over food and bills, the silent strength she had relied on to keep moving forward. She realized that those struggles had shaped her, teaching her resilience, patience, and the quiet power of persistence. Yet now, with support and recognition, she understood that life could hold both challenge and relief, responsibility and care, perseverance and joy. The future began to feel different. Maria started thinking about possibilities beyond immediate survival. She considered further education, small investments for her family's future, and even hobbies she had long abandoned. The weight she had carried alone for so long had lifted enough to allow dreams to reappear. And through it all, Maria never forgot the lessons she had learned. She understood the value of humility, the importance of compassion, and the quiet strength in allowing others to help. She continued to work hard, to care for her family, and to excel professionally, but now, she did so with a balance that brought both achievement and peace. In the end, Maria's life had not been transformed by sudden wealth or dramatic gestures, but by the simple recognition of her humanity and the quiet, steady support that allowed her to continue her journey with hope. She had faced exhaustion, struggle, and the constant weight of responsibility, yet she emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Her family thrived, her work shone, and her spirit, once burdened, now carried a sense of hope and quiet pride that no challenge could extinguish. Maria knew that life would continue to have its difficulties, but she also knew that she no longer had to face them alone. Support, recognition, and empathy had created a ripple effect that touched her, her family, and her colleagues. And in that network of care, she discovered something profound, that true strength was not just in enduring, but in sharing the journey, accepting help, and inspiring others through resilience and hope. The story of Maria, a woman who worked double shifts and carried her family on her shoulders, became more than just her own tale. It became a testament to the quiet power of perseverance, the importance of seeing and valuing others, and the lasting impact of compassion in a world that often moves too quickly to notice. And in that story, there was hope, pride, and the knowledge that even in the hardest times, kindness and support could create extraordinary change.